Okay, so as we started last week, just want to acknowledge, of course, that this SHIUR, the Rabbi Snow's SHIUR, is generously sponsored for the 2024-2025 academic year by Scott and Linda Hannaford. So we thank them for sponsoring this SHIUR. Also, if we can have in mind for our learning, the three Kedoshim, three precious Talmidim of Yeshivat Shalavim, who died al Kiddush Hashem in Gaza a few weeks ago: Eliyahu Moshe Shlomo ben Shimon, Zimbalist Yakir Yaakov ben Ravina, and Shalom ben Yehuda, Hashem Yikom Damam. We should have Besorah Tovot very, very soon. Okay, so I want to just recap what we did last week, and then we'll continue from that point forward. So we were learning the first Mishnah in the second Perek of Pirkei Avot, and we first started off, we spent a nice amount of time trying to understand the significance of the first Mishnah of the second chapter, second Perek, starting with Rabbi Omer, that being Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. We did have some comparisons, nice comparisons between Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi and Moshe Rabbeinu. And in particular, we see that there's a certain level of anivus that they both have, this idea of humility. And also how the Gemara says that you never had, since the time of Moshe until Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, a place where Gedula and Torah were in one spot, within one person. And the Gemara says as well that when Rabbi died, when Rabbi passed away, so anivus ceased to be, the idea of humility ceased to be. And also there is this comparison that Moshe Rabbeinu and Rabbi have this type of Kabbalas HaTorah. Moshe Rabbeinu, of course, was the receiving of the Torah from Har Sinai, whereas Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, he in a way, was the author of the Torah Sheba'al Peh being written down. So a new stage of Torah Shebechsav, which is the Mishnayos, a Torah Sheba'al Peh. And that's why it was very important from all these ideas that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi not be the end of or just a continuation of the first Perek, but rather we start anew with Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi so that we can compare the first Mishnah, the first Perek, to the first Mishnah, the second Perek. Then we get into this whole beautiful question that he has as to what is the Derech Yeshara, what is the just path that a person should choose in their lives, and we started to try and think in regards to what his answer was, which is, he says, anything which is a tiferes le'oseha and a tiferes lo min ha'adam, which is something which is accrediting himself, and also something which brings esteem from all people. Something that, you can feel good about yourself by doing so, but also that it is something nice in the eyes of others, and it also helps others. And the Rabbeinu Yonah, quoting the opinion of the Rambam, and also his own opinion as well, is that there's two ways of understanding what exactly that means, the idea of what are we choosing this tiferes, what is this tiferes, this esteem and credit that one chooses for themselves. So one path was looking at it as, it's referring to midot tovot, good virtues. And not only that, but it was the shvil hazahav, it was the golden path, this middle path. That's how the Rambam understands it. Because when you choose a middle path, you're always taking into account how I'm going to feel towards this. I'm not going so far to one end where I'm going to feel burnt out, let's say, or where I totally separate myself from everybody else. And then on the other hand, the golden path allows you to, and the moderation allows you to be relatable to other people. That's one way of looking at it. And the other way is the idea of mitzvos. The idea of that what Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi is referring to is a life of doing mitzvos. And the Rabbeinu Yonah says that the mitzvos mean a mitzvah in its proper time. A mitzvah in its proper time. So by doing that, when you do a mitzvah in its proper time, it sounds as though, of course, you yourself, when you perform the mitzvah, you feel good about it. And you should feel good about it, because when you do something in its proper time, that means you're doing what Hashem wants you to do at that moment. But also, when we talk about doing a mitzvah in its proper time, you are, in turn, helping many people. You're really helping Klal Yisrael. Because, for example, if you want to perform the building of a sukkah, you'll know that other people are going to need a sukkah as well. So it'll be good for me, and it'll be good for anybody else who needs a sukkah. Same thing with Arba Minim. Same thing when it comes to having matzah on Pesach. Doing the mitzvah in its proper time. Right? Same thing with any type of GoFundMe, charity, whatever email you get regarding helping some type of organization. So we would hope that the mitzvah in its proper time is helping myself by doing the mitzvah, and of course it's helping the organization that needs the money in that time, right? Only have 24 hours. what happens if you don't reach your goal in 24 hours? It's all over. They lose all their money. Did you ever wonder? You ever get scared when you see the time countdown? Does anyone know what I'm talking about here? Right? Right. The funds, right? So what happens if it reaches zero and you don't reach the goal? Do they lose everything? But so now it doesn't work that way. Now they just extend it for another 12 hours, as if nothing happened. It's like another 3 days. Okay, we got a grace period. We have another year till we get our Baruch Hashem. Okay, so those are really the two examples. Now, in the continuation of the Mishnah, where Rabbi says, one should be careful. One should be careful when it comes to a mitzvah which is viewed as light or not as severe, not as serious. You should be careful with those mitzvahs just like the real heavy and strict mitzvot, because we do not know the matan schar and shal mitzvahs. We don't know the exact reward of a mitzvah. Now we stopped here. This is where we were in the middle of. And we first kind of took a look at the opinion of Rashi, where Rashi gives the parable how it's just like a king who wants his servants to tend to the orchard, and if the king were to express to them which ones are the most important trees, and the assumption is that a servant will be, put on the good list of the king if he takes care of what's most precious to the king, so then everyone's going to go to those precious trees, to the one that the king acknowledged as maybe the more important ones. But the problem is, if you have an orchard that's all set up, so it's not going to benefit the king if only the nice trees were taken care of, and then look what happens to the shrubbery, right, or the low bushes or the small trees. No one took care of them, so then it doesn't look nice. You want everything to look good. You want everything to look good in the shul, right? So that's why, as Rashi says, Hashem does not tell us the reward of each mitzvah. To save the totality of this orchard, or this beautiful world of mitzvos. We don't want people to just focus on one and not the other. So it sounded from Rashi that the difference is, in truth, there are mitzvos which are more precious and are more valuable, positive mitzvos, but Hashem doesn't want us to know them because it might ruin the totality of everything. Within the Rambam, it sounds as though that might not be the approach. It's similar, but I think that the Rambam does is that he says, listen, in the Torah is very clear as to the levels of negative commandments. There are times it tells us the punishments of negative commandments. We can all assume that if the Torah has a punishment of skila, of stoning, which is a horrible way of death, that's definitely worse than when the Torah says that you will get lashes. Okay, so we know there are gradations to the negative commandments. However, when it comes to positive commandments, there's no indication as to what is more valuable in the eyes of Hashem. Now, the truth is, you could ask the question, aren't there a few mitzvahs where it really promises long life? Maybe those would be the 3 mitzvahs, or the 4 that we would say, okay, this in a way does create a question towards this whole, even the whole Mishnah. But in truth, when you look at all the mitzvahs, you're never really told exactly, what is the reward, or how does it end off benefiting the person. We don't really know the points in heaven, and that might be because there really is no differences of a point system. And as we said, maybe you could look at it as we like to look at things as schar va'onesh. What reward are we getting? What might lead to a punishment? And that is entirely focused on the individual. That I am concerned about myself towards those goals, or towards the lack of those goals. But when you take a step back and you put yourself into a broader society, and you put yourself into a community that reaches the overarching goal of whatever it means to bring Shem Shemaim, to bring HaKadosh Baruch Hu into our presence, so then things change. Then we go back to, who's to say that in Hashem's eyes there ever is a more valuable or a less valuable type of tree, or more valuable place and less valuable place? We're not ones to say that. We have no idea. Maybe Hashem values everything the same. Maybe there's this incredible, beautiful picture of mitzvahs that Hashem really needs, And of course, right, when you make a puzzle, the irony is when you make a puzzle, so it's always the easiest to find the pictures of the puzzle. Like, let's say it's a picture of a family, and in the background you just have a beautiful sky, right? So it'll be the hardest to find those pieces that are all blue and how they're going to fit in. And maybe it's the hardest to really see how the small mitzvos are the ones that really fit into the broader picture of this beautiful world, of bringing Shem Shemaim to this beautiful world. But no, that's the point, is that we have to also value those very small mitzvos. Even the small little puzzle piece that's just blue and it's the same blue throughout, it's still a different piece, and it still is there to create the beautiful painting of what this world is supposed to be. And we have to be messengers for those mitzvos. Those mitzvos are calling our names. I think the other thing also is that it's important for a person to find their mitzvah. Right? Some people have their mitzvah. It could, and many times it's a mitzvah which falls under the broader umbrella of chesed, but it's important for a person to really connect to that type of mitzvah. And then in their eyes, of course, it wouldn't be considered a light mitzvah. It'll actually be a very important mitzvah. It'll be a machmir mitzvah, because it's something which is very valuable to them. So maybe that's the other way of looking at this, is that when it comes to a point system, we do look at things as something which is more valuable versus less. But if you yourself really value a mitzvah, it becomes so great in your eyes. Right? And that could be, and that's maybe why minhag is so important. Because someone, when you have minhagim, when a family has their minhagim, even if it's the smallest thing that no other family would really appreciate, let's be honest, for that family it means everything. Don't change my Shalom Aleichem tune. Right? That's my tune. Right? That means everything to me. Come on, it's just a tune. No, it's everything. And in a way, that's really what Rabbi, I think, is trying to encourage us, that in life you shouldn't have the light things. Everything at a certain point, if it really means something to you, it should be viewed as, in your eyes, as the machmir things. Okay. Now, another thing that the Rambam says as well is that he brings this concept which it makes perfect sense here. He says, why is there this notion, this beautiful rule, really throughout the Talmud, this idea of osek b'mitzvah pater min ha-mitzvah? When you're involved in one mitzvah, you're exempt from another mitzvah. What is that all about? And in a way, it's actually there to teach us what Rebbe is trying to teach us. Right? When you're involved in a mitzvah, nothing should get in the way of that mitzvah. Now, I think the Maharal does say, now, there are some mitzvahs that we know do get in the way of other mitzvahs. Right? For example, a mace mitzvah. Right? If there's nobody else to tend to someone who has passed on, that is you should really stop everything to do that mitzvah. Anything less than that, right? Who's to say that any mitzvah should get in the way of a mitzvah you're in the middle of? Because once again, that mitzvah you're in the middle of defines who you are. It's everywhere where you should be at that moment in time, right? So that notion alone really shows that osek b'mitzvah, pater min ha-mitzvah. Brings us the beauty of every single mitzvah. Okay, and what's the only mitzvah that really doesn't apply to this? That when you're involved in this particular thing, it never exempts you from other mitzvos? Unless you assume that other people could do this, and you know other people can do this. The one mitzvah really is the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. When you're in the middle of Talmud Torah, you can't really use this ticket of osek b'mitzvah pater min ha-mitzvah. When you know there's another mitzvah upon you, you really should be the one going and doing that and stopping your learning, unless you know that there's a whole group of people that are about to do that mitzvah. And I think the reason for that is because we learn al manas la'asok. We learn so that we could perform. And therefore, by stopping and doing the mitzvah, you're actually showing that the Torah that I'm learning, it's real, right? I mean, it's not a game. And maybe that's one of the main reasons as to why that is the case. Okay, now there is one piece from the Maharal I wanted to share with everyone. Very short. Now the Maharal in his sefer called the Derech HaChaim, it's a beautiful parish on Pirkei Avot, and most of his explanation is quite lengthy, but it brings up a lot of deep ideas. So one thing he said, though, and he honed in on this word. If we look at the Mishnah, it could have said, She'en ata yodeya, in order to say matan scharan shel mitzvah. So we don't really know the gift of the reward, or the giving of the reward of mitzvos. So he says, I'll just read it inside. He says, Amnam, however, Ma she'amar matan scharan v'lo amar she'ein ata yodea scharan shel mitzvah. From the reason that it said matan, right, this gift, this giving, and it doesn't say just the words of that we don't know the reward of mitzvah, which really it could have said that. Because we've seen this Mishnah so many times, it sounds only right to say matan scharan, but the truth is, you could have just said she'ein yodea scharan shel mitzvos. We didn't know you could have said we don't know the reward of mitzvos. The Omer al zeh. So he says, Kival Omar lama ein ata yodea scharan shel mitzvah. V'amar al zeh ki yesh la matan scharan. Because it's coming to teach us here that there is what? There is a giving, a handing over of the reward. Kol netinahu min hanosin asher hu Hashem misborach. He says, all giving is from Hashem, the creator of the world. V'i efshar ladat mahu eitzel Hashem misborach. And we have no idea what it really means to Hashem, the mitzvah we're doing, and how that will lead to what Hashem wants to give to us. So he paints the idea of matan, of giving. It's so important to understand this. We have no clue how Hashem wants to give to us the reward of a mitzvah that we did. Now, on the flip side, however, aval ha'onesh, but when it comes to a punishment, hu mitzad ha'avera, lo mitzad ha'nosin. The whole idea of a punishment only comes from the fact that one did an avera, one did a sin. It doesn't come from the giver. So interesting, right? What he's saying is, Hashem's not giving us the punishment. It's the sin that gives us the punishment. This type of thing one can know. We can know in the Torah. It will tell us what exactly the punishment is for a certain sin, because it's not coming from Hashem. But when it comes to a reward, and then it's coming from Hashem, we have no clue how much Hashem would want to give us with regard to any mitzvah that we perform. Okay, so that was a small little piece when it comes to the Maharal. Okay, now another thing that I want to say is that let's continue in the Mishnah. So he has this. So now, when it comes to a theme, could it be that Rabbi is totally focused on mitzvos, and he wants to give us really a beautiful approach to how to understand mitzvos. And by doing so, that would mean that the first thing he teaches us of choosing a path which has tiferes to it would maybe go like that of the Rabbeinu Yonah that we're talking about performing mitzvos in its proper time. And we said last week as well that you could still look at it through the lens of the Rambam, say that the Tiferes is talking about good deeds and good midos, good virtues. And by doing so, when you have good virtues, then you're ready for the world of mitzvos. But it does seem as though the theme of this Mishnah is all about mitzvos, because the next thing he says here is, so after we've established and clarified how one should look at all mitzvos really through the same lens and value each mitzvah the same, now it gets to the other challenge, right? What happens when it's not just about mitzvot, but now you have other things coming in the way of mitzvahs, which is really day-to-day life, right? The other things of life that come in the way. How are we supposed to look at those? And how are we supposed to measure them towards the mitzvah that we've already clarified that they're all very valuable? And he says, one should calculate the loss of a mitzvah in correspondence to its reward. What does it mean, the loss of a mitzvah? It means that when I do a mitzvah, what have I lost out on when I do the mitzvah? The extra sleep that I lost out on because I decided to wake up to go and daven. The loss that I had when I could have joined my friends to go out for dinner, and instead I went to pay a shiva call. Things of that nature. So I lost something by doing the mitzvah. It's so interesting. He's saying, he's being very honest with the human condition. He's saying, yeah, I understand. It is a loss for someone because they're giving up something, even though it has nothing to do with the world of Kedusha, with the world of sanctity. But they are losing something. But one should remember, you have to calculate what's the loss that I accepted by doing that mitzvah versus the reward of doing that mitzvah. And now again, when we're talking about the reward of a mitzvah, so we have to keep in mind who is the one giving the reward. How precious was it to Hashem that we chose to do this mitzvah? And then on the other hand, it's uschar avera keneged hefseda. And the reward of a sin, right? The pleasure one derives from a sin. Now it's interesting. This is not exactly parallel to what we were saying earlier. The things we were talking about earlier were not necessarily a sin that one did. It's just what else could I have done at the time that I did a mitzvah. Doesn't mean it was a sin. Here he's saying, now when you're in the realm of a person decides to do something inappropriate, so clearly something drove them to do that, and therefore there was, we'll call it a reward. The humanistic, the chomer, the ruach behemit, right? The animalistic side of us that receives a certain reward for the sin that we do, keneged hefseda, in correspondence to clearly its loss. How much did we really lose in the moment of when we're deriving that benefit or that pleasure? We have to always remember how much we lose, even though it's not in front of our eyes, but we have to keep that in mind. We have to calculate those things. Okay, so this clearly is a continuation of what Rabbi was referring to earlier. It's really giving us the full picture of how to approach mitzvos. So, Rav Hirsch, I want to read this to you, little excerpt that he has in his Pirkei Avot as well. So what he does is he takes these two teachings of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and he clarifies in a way what's going on behind the scenes. It's a beautiful way of how he explains this part of the Mishnah of hefsid mitzvah keneged schara uschara vera keneged hefseda. So just read it. I'll just read it and let's try and appreciate what he's saying here. So here we are told of matan scharon, as distinct from schar mitzvah ve'avera. So right, Rebbe, he makes a distinction between a reward of a mitzvah versus right the reward that somebody gets for doing a mitzvah, versus the idea of the reward of a mitzvah and a sin, which follows, which came right after Rabbi telling us that we receive reward from a mitzvah. For good deeds and sins alike carry a twofold recompense. First, there is the objective reward of punishment. This comes to us sooner or later, whichever may be ordained in God's decree, either in this world or in the world to come. It is to this form of recompense that matan scharan refers to, meaning there's one side where we have to realize there's something that will take place after life. This matan scharan is something that we're going to recognize and approach it and receive it. This is after Admei Aveshrim, after 120. The other recompense is spiritual in character, and it comes to us immediately. So he's saying this next part of the schar mitzvah, hefsid mitzvah, schar aver, he says that comes immediately in the life we're living right now. It is inherent in the good deed or in the sin itself. The immediate reward of any divine command scrupulously performed is a sense of moral elevation, an increase in our moral strength, and the awareness, most blissful of all, that we are worthy of the nearness of God because we have faithfully carried out our duty toward Him. He's saying right here, right now, the reward of the mitzvah is something that's going to feel good to you right now, because in this world, we did something to feel close to Hashem. Then the response for any evil act is also instantaneous. It takes the form of a sense of loss of moral purity, a weakening of moral fiber, a greater propensity to additional sin, and most crushing of all, the realization which renders us unable to look up calmly to our God, namely, that we have failed to fulfill our purpose, sinned against our destiny, and hence forfeited the approval of God and, indeed, the right to be satisfied with ourselves. Wow. Such reward and such punishment are easy enough to comprehend. It is to these that the term schar mitzvah and hefsed aver in the Mishnah refer to. So he's not saying it's something that happens after Admei Aveshrim. He's saying mamish, it's a feeling that one has at the moment when one is in tune with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and how they're supposed to be an Eved Hashem, I'm supposed to serve Hashem. Then, by definition, I feel good when I do something that's a mitzvah. I feel close to Hashem. And sadly, on the other hand, if I didn't do something good, I feel distant. And that is the onesh right then and there. It's a beautiful hesber of Rav Hirsch. Okay. And now, wanted to just touch upon something of the Nesivas Shalom. The Nesivas Shalom, the Shalom Rabbi, which I want to give credit to Rabbi Sam Shore. I think the first time outside of, it might have been the first time I was around Nesivas Shalom was in your apartment in the Heights. And you give something with Jeff Schrager, right? It's like a Shabbos. And so that was the first time I really was introduced to the Nesivas Shalom with the for sure. Netivot.
Yeah, not Netivat.
Netivot. So true. Netivot Shalom. Okay, the paths of peace. Okay, so what does he say? He looks at this Mishnah a little differently, and he connects the first part to the second part. I think he looks at it a little more like that of the Rabbeinu Yonah, connecting the idea of mitzvot. So he says, up until now, we've defined Rebbe's answer of Kol Shi Tiferet Le'oseh V'Tiferet Lo Min Ha'adam. We've said that it's referring to the person that's doing the mitzvot, or these acts, this which leads to Tiferet. And the second one was that of a Tiferet, which is to other people, Min Ha'adam. So that's not how the Son of a Rebbe understands this. He says, it's all talking about the individual. It's all talking about the person, with the realization that there are certain tendencies that everybody has. There are certain things that are very simple for a person to do. There are certain mitzvos which naturally a person just feels comfortable with doing them. And therefore there's really no challenge for one to go ahead and take the effort on doing those mitzvot. However, there are certain mitzvot which are against the grain. They're not part of our nature. They are very difficult to do. They're what we call nisyonot. They are challenging. And he says those two sides of the same coin is what Rebbe's referring to. It's all about the same person. That it's an internal question that a person has to have towards themselves. He says, when it's tiferes le'oseh, it's splendorous to the person doing them. That means to the one who it's naturally easy for them to do. And then he has here, but when it's min ha'adam, that's for the ones that are difficult to do. And he brings a verse. He says, Ve'elu ha-mitzvos shehein b'nigud leteva. These mitzvot, which are really against the nature of a person, nechshavim tiferet lo min ha'adam. They're considered like the splendor from the Adam. Right, what does he mean? Ha'adam mora al shleimut. When we talk about Adam, we're talking about a person reaching his shleimut, reaching their potential, fulfilling and filling themselves. Command Amar, as it says in Kohelet, Et ha'elokim yirah, we should fear Hashem, vet mitzvotav shemor, and we're supposed to guard his mitzvot, kizeh Kol ha'adam, because this is the entire person. Shetachet adam hi l'chof et yitro ulachnia et hachomer, because it is the purpose, the goal of a person to, in a way, overcome his inclinations and to humble his chomer, his physicality, the non-nishama part of who he is. That's kol ha'adam. That's the entire person. So he's saying on that side of the person, the one of the chomer, the one where you yourself are, the chomer side of you is always saying, don't do that. It's a burden. It's difficult. It's not easy. Stay away from it. If you can overcome those, that's min ha'adam. That's tiferet min ha'adam. You're finding within Adam, within the adama of yourself, how to reach shleimus. Beautiful. And then he goes and he explains, by going further in the Mishnah, when we start talking about a kala and kivachamura, he says that in every single mitzvah, it's important to realize that there is a easier side to it and a more difficult side to it. But let's never forget, every single mitzvah has the opportunity, and he says, and this is very important for him, in understanding what mitzvot are, they are the tachlit of all mitzvot is to tidbak, is to connect. That it is that a person always wants to connect to their Creator, to Hashem. And it's important to realize how, as we said earlier, every single mitzvah is not just, something to fulfill a mitzvah, but rather it is a channel, it is a path of finding a way to connect to Hashem. That in itself is really the goal that one has to always remember, is the main goal of all mitzvot. So therefore, when it comes to any mitzvah, if a person is able to overcome a certain inclination which is telling them, don't do it, stay away from it, you have something better to do, and in that moment, if you could say, I'm still going to do that, whether it's the smallest mitzvahs or the biggest mitzvahs, what he just did was, he overcame some type of inclination, and by definition, he has now clinged to Hashem. And that is the major goal of all mitzvot, whether it be kala, whether it be chamura. So that is how the Netivot Shalom explains what Rabbi said, what his answer was of Tiferet Lo Aseh and Tiferet Lo Mina Adam. It's all within the person himself. Now, of course, if one is able to do that, they then create a different reality for themselves, and I think they'll be able to interact on a better level with all other people. So then you would bring it back to probably what we'll call as the pshat level, the simple understanding of the Mishnah, that it is talking about connecting to yourself and connecting to other people. Okay, now the one other approach to this Mishnah, this is kind of an idea that I was trying to formulate, so I'd like to share it with everyone. Okay, so he first starts off with Yeshara, the idea of Ezohi Derech Yeshara, which is and we've loosely translated as the just path that a person should choose. However, when you see the word Yeshara, you're reminded of certain things, such as the book of Bereshis is called Sefer HaYashar. It is we'll call it the Yashras, the straight path of goodness, of being good. And when you start speaking in terms of Yashras, so maybe Rebbe, it's interesting. We can link this to what we were talking about last week. Once again, so if the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, what's the starting point of the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avos? It's the starting point of Kabbalah Satorah from Har Sinai. The first Rashi in Chumash, it asks, why didn't the Torah start from HaChodesh Zelachem? It was the first mitzvah. So now when you start talking about the mitzvah, it's the first mitzvah, wouldn't it be appropriate to start from Kabbalah Satorah when Hashem gives us all the mitzvahs and gives us the Torah? And of course, it would, with the theme of our Mishnah, it would make sense that we should rehash and talk about Kabbalah Satorah again if we're going to start going into the understanding of mitzvot. But little did we forget, once you have Kabbalah Satorah and Har Sinai being the first thing, you can ask the question, if we have good answers for why the Torah started with Bereshis, right? Even though the question of why doesn't it start with the mitzvot, it's a good question, but still we have good answers. One is the major answer of Rashi is the idea of we have to know how Eretz Yisrael is ours. One can explain, no, we can learn from the Avos as well. So there are good reasons. So now, why didn't Pirkei Avos start with Bereshis? Why did Pirkei Avos, which is teaching us all the beautiful values of what a person should attain to be and to do, why did it start with Kabbalah Satorah? Start with something earlier. So maybe what we're doing right now is Rabbi is saying that's a good point. I'm going to start with the question of how do we reach Yashras? How do we touch in or cap into the Sefer HaYashar? Maybe that's what he's asking. The idea of Bereshis. And now there's a beautiful saying. I just wanted to share this with everyone. It was quoted, the article quoted this, Rav Yosef Breuer, right? He started Breuer's in Washington Heights, lived from 1882 to 1980. He would say many, many times, it's more important to be Glatt Yosher in one's dealing with people than to be Glatt kosher with what one eats. Wow. You could sit on that line for weeks. Just think about it. It's so true, right? Halavai, we should all be as concerned with our Glatt Yashrus versus our Glatt Kashrus. Okay, we take that in mind. So now, taking this, the idea of Yisrael, he was broken down into Yashar Kel, right? It's the idea of we should have a Yashrus in how we connect to Hashem, or our connection to Hashem is based off of Yashrus. So now taking this to account, maybe what Rebbe is doing here is he's trying to define how is it that we're supposed to, what we could link back to what it meant to be connected to Sefer HaYosher, to the Avos, to those stories. And maybe within his answer, he's alluding to something here. I thought it was quite interesting. The idea of Kol Shehi Tiferes Le'osa V'Tiferes Lo Mina Adam. The idea of something being Tiferes, which we've loosely translated as something which is accredited to himself and esteemed or credited to another person, to other people. Why did it choose the word Tiferet? Right? Kol Shehi Tov Le'osa, Kol Shehi Chesed, or Rachamim. These are certain terms that we would probably all use. When in your life would you truly feel comfortable using the word Tiferet to attribute it to someone's choice in life? Is that even something you could choose? Could you choose to be Tiferet? What is that? How does that take manifest with the actions we choose to do? So this word, it's a trigger word actually when we start talking about the Avos, because Tiferet is the virtue of Yaakov Avinu. Right? We have the 7 shepherds. We have the 7 Sfirot. This is something that if someone likes to read all of the Kabbalistic tefillot after Sfirat HaOmer every night, it's beautiful, beautiful tefillot there. So we always at the very end have an insert of the Sfira. And also when we talk about the Ushpizin, even though by the Ushpizin we don't really talk in terms of Chesed and Gvura and Tiferet and Hod and Yesod and Netzach and Malchus. We don't talk about those. But during the Omer, we do say things. So let's just go through the 7. So Chesed is the virtue which is attributed to Avram Avinu. Gevura, strength, is to Yitzchak. Tiferet, which we'll talk about, is Yaakov. Netzach, eternity, that is Moshe. He's eternal. His Torah is eternal. Hod, the idea of like glory, is there for Aaron HaKohen, because he's the Kohen Gadol. He brings the Hod, the beauty, the glory to Am Yisrael through him being the intermediary. Yesod, the foundation of Yadut. The Yesod is that of Yosef. And we could say Yosef is the Yesod because he lived in Mitzrayim with really no influence from his father anymore or from any Jewish community, yet he stayed strong to his beliefs. That's why he's called the Tzaddik, because he represents the foundation of Yadut, that no matter what, you have a strong foundation, you could weather any storm. And then Malchut is that of David HaMelech. So we have these 7 beautiful virtues, and our 7 shepherds represent them. So let's just focus on the first 3. So we had Chesed as Abraham, we had Gvura as Yitzchak, and Tiferet is Yaakov. So what is Tiferet? What was Yaakov? Why was it that when it comes to Yaakov, all of his children were tzaddikim? They were pure. You know, of course, no matter what the stories are, at the end of the day, they represent the tribes of Hashem. They represented a certain level of righteousness, of greatness. Why was it that Yaakov merited to have these 12 tribes and all of them were incredible leaders? Whereas Abraham, he had 2 sons and one was Ishmael. Wasn't so great. Why was it that Yitzchak had 2 sons as well and one was Esav? Wasn't so great. So what happened there? So one explanation is because when you only have the Chesed, there's something lacking. When you only have the Gevura, there's something lacking. Now, you definitely needed the trailblazer to teach us what true Chesed is, what is true kindness. And therefore, he had to be on one side of the spectrum. And then you also needed someone to teach us what is real Gevura, what is real strength. And therefore, it was on the other side of the spectrum. And then you have this mesh where you fuse the 2 together, this harmonious coexistence, and that came through Yaakov. That came through what we say is Yaakov was a Tiferet. He brought somehow the Chesed and the Gevura together. And therefore, he was able to fuse together these 2 incredible attributes, but somehow mesh them into one. Now, when you talk about Chesed, when you talk about Avram Avinu, So maybe there was something lacking. Maybe there was a certain level of discipline that wasn't available, and maybe that's why there was a Yishmael that came from him. Who's to know really, but it was some way of maybe explaining why it wasn't perfect throughout and why there was a Yishmael. When you talk about Gvur, when you talk about strength, maybe there was something missing on the Chesed department with Yitzchak. And for that reason, with I'm thinking about it though, it was that Esav was close to Yitzchak, which was the irony of it all. However, okay, but still, from the fact that it was so much gvura there was so much strength. Oh, maybe that's what Esav really linked to. He saw strength, and that's how Esav, how he patterned his life after this strength. Whereas if he maybe there was a little more chesed, then could have tamed Esav maybe a little. Maybe we could suggest these things. Okay, yes.
Yaakov's name wasn't changed, but it was changed to Yisrael. So why do we say Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, and not Yisrael? What was?
Rishor has a word on this.
There's a beautiful teaching from the Baruch Sha'amar, which is a commentary on the Siddur of the Torah Tanima, Rabbi Baruch Halevi Yavstein, and he says if you add up the number of otiyot, the number of letters in each of those three names, it corresponds to 13. Okay? If you use Yisrael instead of Yaakov, it corresponds to 14. So what's the significance of the number 13 in the annals of Jewish teachings? It's the Yugula Mirat Torah. Every time we recite the first bracha of Birkat HaMazon, we're reminded, says the Rosh Amar, printed in the bracha is a reminder of Hashem and the love of Hashem. Every single member applies. So that's why the bracha is so critical in
Beautiful. It's very Kabbalistic. Beautiful. Okay, so that's definitely a good way to go with this. It's also, it's the name he got from his parents. Yisrael was the name he got from Hashem. So it's like it's too easy at that point, right? But Yaakov, let's not forget, Yaakov himself, through him being himself, he was able to fuse the two, bring the two together, Chesed and Gevura. So maybe what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is saying is that what's the Yashra's path to choose, the Sefer HaYosher path to choose? It's trying to figure out a way to be a little more like Yaakov, where you're able to bring the Chesed of Abraham and the Gevura and the strength of Yitzchak together. Okay, fuse the two together. Figure out what was lacking by both sides and how to mesh them, and that creates Tiferes. Tiferes is the splendor, but it's only the splendor of being the continuity and bringing the Avram and Yitzchak, bring them together and creating a lifestyle and a world that is always carrying those two patriarchs, those two avos, and channel them through a Yaakov Avinu. Somehow to choose that. And I think it's interesting as well, because what you could say is, what is Tiferes Le'oseh? So it's the splendor of the one who's doing this. And if we look at the life of Yitzchak was more to himself, right? He wasn't a person to the people. We don't know any stories about Yitzchak and his chesed. Very little. There's so little that was written on Yitzchak Avinu. He's so secretive. It's the most intriguing character in the Torah to truly understand Yitzchak. But what it's saying is that bring the chesed to the oseha, to the one where his story was really more about him finding shlemus within himself. Bring what had gvura, that being Yitzchak, bring the chesed, so you can make a tiferes for the one doing the thing for himself. And then tiferes lo min ha'adam, bring the tiferes to the one who is so loved by all people, that being Avraham. Bring Tiferes to that. When it was all Chesed, somehow bring Gevura to that as well. And that brings you to Yashras. That brings you to the ultimate Sefer HaYosher, to be a Glatt Yosher, not just Glatt Kosher. Okay. And then maybe you can go into understanding, appreciating the mitzvos. Only that you have now reached a true understanding of the Sefer HaYashar, now you can get to the discussion of mitzvos, which which brings us to, the receiving of the Torah. Okay, in the last part of the Mishnah, we have 3 minutes. I just want to do this last part. Next week, I would love to start the second Mishnah. He says, look, gaze into 3 things, and you will not come to sin. Now he's saving us, right? Because right before he was saying how we're supposed to calculate and measure the difference between the reward of doing a mitzvah versus what you lose, or the reward of a sin versus what you lose. So he says, what are the 3 things? You should know what is above you. Ayin ro'a ve'ozen shoma'as v'chol ma'asecha b'sefer nichtavim. There is an eye that sees, an ear that hears, and all of your actions are written in a book. Okay, so 2 things. One, I thought it was nice to potentially look at it through this lens. Once we have maybe defined this Mishnah to help us connect to the Avos, to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and what they meant to Hashem. So when you first look at this Mishnah, you're saying, this is kind of scary. Like we're really being judged all the time. But maybe there's another way of looking at this. Right? The 3 things that Rabbi Yehuda tells us is, know that there's an eye that sees, an ear that hears, that's listening, and all of your actions are written. You know what that reminds us of, I would think, is that if you have a student to their teacher, what are the 3, you would hope, the 3 ways of communication when a teacher is trying to teach information, is that you would like the student to see the visual, they're seeing what's going on, you would like them to hear exactly what the teacher is saying, and then you would hope, if they're good enough, they actually write notes to know the information that will last more than just the minute of when they learned it. So maybe we can suggest that what Hashem, it's not something scary. It's actually something which is encouraging. We should know that Hashem, in a way, so to speak, is like a student. He wants to learn from us. He wants us to see from us how we are orchestrating a life of beauty, of mitzvos, and he takes pride in those things. Right? So that he's like a student. He's really watching us because he wants to learn from us, so to speak. And he learned in a way, and he saw greatness. He saw what he wanted the world to be like when he saw the Avos. When Kadosh Baruch Hu sees an Avram, he's like, I'm taking notes on this guy. I'm loving this. I'm loving this individual. I'm loving Israel. I want the world to be more like them. I want to learn from them. So we should always remember everything that we do, in a way, we are kind of like a teacher in how Hashem would love the world to be. So that only lifts us up and doesn't create any type of fear, but only it gives us a certain level of motivation. And then the last thing is, Rav Hirsch, he says, it doesn't say bis sefer. It doesn't say that your actions are within a book, right? Meaning in your book, let's say. He says it's bas sefer. Your actions are written in the book of the world, the book of all history. And it's important for us to know that the actions that we do, they're not just in a vacuum of right here, just today, but rather they are things that we do that impact all history. It can impact what happened in the past, what's of course going on now, and what will happen in the future. We should have brachos to be able to choose wisely, to realize that in a way we're showing Kadosh Baruch Hu how beautiful life can be. He'll love to write it down in the book. And of course, we've been saying we should have Besorah Tovot very, very soon. Okay, we will stop here, and Mirza